You ever notice how the world screams, but no one's really listening? Noise everywhere, opinions, warnings, whispers. And yet, most people walk around deaf to the very thing that could save them. Because it's not about sound, is it? It's about timing. You hear too late, you act too slow, you miss it. Not because the message wasn't clear, but because you were too proud, too distracted, too convinced you already knew. You think you've got time. You wake up, you stretch, you scroll through noise, you sip your coffee, like the universe owes you another 24 hours just because you opened your eyes. But what if I told you time doesn't care about your routines? It doesn't care about your comfort, your schedule, your 5-year plan. Time doesn't knock politely. It snatches things when you're not looking. It tears pages from your story without warning. And when it does, you're left stuttering phrases like, I should have, I was going to, I didn't think it happened this fast. People act like time is their employee, like it's just going to stand in the corner and wait for them to get serious. As if they can procrastinate on purpose and still expect purpose to scream. And by the time you're finally paying attention, it's not a whisper anymore. It's a wreck, a collapse, a consequence. That's how life works. It always whispers before it explodes. But you want signs. You want writing in the sky, lightning from heaven, a booming voice with subtitles. You ignore the subtle shifts, the quiet nudges, the pit in your stomach that knows. And when everything crashes down, you act surprised, like it came out of nowhere. But nothing comes out of nowhere. There were clues. There were cracks. There were moments tailor-made for your breakthrough. And you blinked through them because you thought you had time. And that's the tragedy of it all. Not that people don't know what they should do, that they wait too long to do it. They wait for clarity instead of choosing commitment. They wait for proof instead of trusting their instinct. They wait for someone else to confirm what they already feel deeply inside. You know what that's called? Cowardice in a costume, dressed up like caution, masked as wisdom. But fear is fear, and it's excellent at impersonations. Now let's talk about the voice, the one you've been ignoring. It doesn't scream, it doesn't threaten, it doesn't beg. It waits, patient, relentless, like a ticking bomb in your chest. You hear it in traffic, in the shower, right before sleep wraps around your skull. That voice is not your imagination, it's your invitation. But it won't stick around forever. Because when you ignore the call long enough, silence starts to feel normal. You numb out, you settle in, you build a life out of leftovers and act like it's gourmet. So what happens? You start mistaking busyness for progress, movement for meaning. You stack days like bricks, but never build anything real. And you tell yourself you're just waiting for the right moment, when really, you're just afraid of what would happen if you actually listened. Because listening requires change. And change is messy. It requires you to break your patterns, question your motives, and face the parts of you that have been dragging their feet in the mud. The scariest part? No one's coming to force you to act. No one's going to shove you into greatness. That voice you hear? It's giving you a chance, not a command. Free will is a dangerous gift. You can hear exactly what you need to hear, and still walk away unchanged. Still go back to sleep. Still stay in places you've outgrown because they're familiar. But don't confuse peace with comfort. Real peace is disruptive. It rattles your cage. It tells you the truth when lies would feel better. So here we are. You, sitting on a time bomb of potential. The clock's been ticking, but you've convinced yourself it's just background noise. You've learned how to live with the urgency without ever acknowledging it. You've trained yourself to ignore the heat, the pressure, the pulsing under your skin that says, you were made for more. You've played deaf so long, you don't even recognize the sound of purpose anymore. But it hasn't forgotten you. It's still calling. It's just not whispering this time. Ever notice how people claim they want change, but only if it doesn't cost them anything? They shout about transformation, but hold on to their habits like heirlooms. It's fascinating, really. The way we romanticize growth, talk about it like it's a spiritual makeover, like we're all just one vision board away from a new life. But here's the truth that makes people squirm. Real change is ugly. It's brutal. It's inconvenient. And most of all, it's lonely. Everyone loves the idea of becoming something better. But the second it starts to demand something from them, the second it asks them to leave behind comfort, people, identities, they flinch. They crawl back into the arms of their old life like it's a warm blanket. Not because it's right, but because it's familiar. That's the addiction, isn't it? Familiarity, the known. Even if it's painful, at least you know how it feels. At least you've memorized that kind of suffering. So what happens when the call comes? When that inner voice, the one you've been muting with distractions and cheap dopamine, suddenly grows louder and clearer than ever? It doesn't ask politely. It says, now. It doesn't wait for you to get ready. It shows up and burns the map. And you've got two choices: obey or delay. Act or hesitate. Walk forward or retreat into the same shadows you swore you'd outgrow. But see, obedience isn't the glamorous word people want to hear. Obedience sounds too rigid, too submissive. It threatens the ego. It insults the illusion of control. But that's the secret. Obedience isn't weakness. It's war. It's choosing to follow something higher than your impulses, louder than your fears, deeper than your wounds. It's standing in front of your own reflection and saying, I hear the voice and I will not betray it again. But obedience is costly. It demands detachment from expectations, from applause, from timelines you made up to impress people who don't even matter. You'll be misunderstood, mocked, even envied, not because you're special, but because you dared to move while everyone else kept negotiating with their hesitation. People don't hate you for changing. They hate that your change exposes their excuses. And let's talk about silence. Because when that voice tells you to obey, it doesn't always come with instructions. It doesn't hand you a checklist or a map. Sometimes it just says, move. And when you ask where, it says, you'll see. That's where obedience gets uncomfortable. That's where the silence stretches out and starts whispering lies. You say, I did. You said it. And then you say, I will. And then you say, I will. And then you say, I did. You said it. And then you say, I will. It tells you nothing's happening. It tells you you're wasting your time. It tells you to go back. But the silence isn't your enemy. It's the test. It's the space between the command and the consequence. The cocoon between the caterpillar and the wings. But you have to understand, silence is not absence. Just because you're not hearing confirmation doesn't mean you didn't hear the call. Sometimes the silence is proof you're in the middle of something holy, because only people who are actually moving feel the weight of silence. The ones still standing still, they're too numb to notice. Too busy distracting themselves with fake urgency and empty busyness. So while they're out there chasing applause, you're being sculpted in secret. While they're busy looking successful, you're being stripped down to your essence. And it hurts. God, it hurts. To obey without clarity, to move without applause, to become without being seen. But that's where real power is forged. Not in the spotlight, in the shadows, in the silence, in the choices no one sees but heaven. You're not being ignored. You're being refined. You're not being punished. You're being positioned. But that only makes sense if you trust the voice. If you actually believe that what called you knows more than what comforts you. You're being refined. You're being positioned. But that only makes sense if you actually believe that what called you knows more than what comforts you. And that's the terrifying part, isn't it? Releasing the grip, unlearning the hustle, surrendering the illusion that you're in charge of your own transformation. But that's what obedience is. It's a surrender soaked in fire. It's saying yes before you see the results. It's walking into the unknown and trusting that whatever's waiting for you is worth more than what you're leaving behind. And most people won't do it. They'll talk about it. They'll post about it. But when the moment comes to actually obey, they'll look back at what's burning and ask if it's too late to turn around. They want to be chosen, but they don't want to be separated. They want elevation, but not the isolation that comes before it. Everybody wants the crown, but nobody wants to bleed for it. You mention chosen, and they light up. Oh, the ego loves that word. It sounds glamorous, doesn't it? Like it comes with a spotlight and a round of applause. But they forget that being chosen isn't a reward. It's a responsibility. It's a calling that costs you everything you thought you needed. When you're chosen, the rules change, the comfort zones collapse, the relationships shift, the mirrors get clearer. And here's the part they never talk about. Being chosen means you're going to be the first to be misunderstood, first to be attacked, first to be left out. Not because you're broken, but because you're marked. Marked by something the average mind can't process. And marked by something the average mind can't process. You become a walking contradiction. You don't fit anymore. Not in conversations, not in crowds, not in expectations. Because what's inside you doesn't match what's around you. People think being chosen makes life easier. No. It makes you accountable to a level of truth most people run from. It means you don't get to play small anymore. You don't get to keep lying to yourself for comfort. You don't get to stay in places you've outgrown just to make others feel secure. The moment you're chosen, mediocrity becomes poison. You can't even breathe around it. Your soul starts itching when you're surrounded by fake peace and silent compromise, and it's lonely. Don't romanticize it. Being chosen means nights you can't explain to anyone. It means crying not because you're weak, but because you're being stretched by a vision you never asked for, but can't ignore. It means walking into rooms and feeling everything shift before you say a word. It means last month we ran into a life-threatening situation. Not fake peace, but because you're being stretched by a vision you never asked for, but can't ignore. It means not liking someone. It means watching people you once called family start treating you like a stranger, not because you changed, but because they didn't. But here's the part that makes people nervous. The separation is strategic. The isolation is surgical. You're not being abandoned. You're being extracted, pulled out of the crowd before the crowd infects your calling. You're not losing friends. You're shedding skin. You're not going crazy. You're waking up. And when you wake up, you see things. You see the masks. You see the patterns. You see the prisons people decorate and call home. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Of being chosen. You'll try to go back. You will. The discomfort of becoming will tempt you to retreat. You'll want to shrink, to dim your light, to pretend you will hear it. The curse and the gift of being chosen. The curse of the crown, you'll call it the thing about purpose. It haunts you. It follows you into your sleep. It shows up in your silence. It speaks loudest when you try to run. Because you can run from everything else, but not from what you're carrying inside. And that's the tension. You're carrying something too big for your current environment, and the space is suffocating you. That's not a sign to quit. That's confirmation to move, to evolve, to obey. Because when you're chosen, your life stops being about survival. It becomes about assignment. It becomes about impact. And impact never happens in comfort. It happens in the tension, in the wilderness, in the moments that break your pride just enough to let wisdom in. So while they're out there chasing approval, you're being stripped of everything fake. While they're distracted by noise, you're learning the language of silence. While they're performing for applause, you're being rebuilt for purpose. That's why you don't feel like them. That's why the things that satisfy them leave you empty. That's why the paths that excite them bore you. Because you weren't built for easy, you were built for significant. And significant always starts with separation. They won't understand. They're not supposed to. They'll call it arrogance. They'll say you're too intense, too deep, too serious. Let them talk. Let them misunderstand. You weren't called to convince them. You were called to complete something, to deliver something, to become something their limited lenses could never comprehend. Because when you're chosen, your life is not your own anymore. It belongs to the mission, to the vision, to the higher thing that's been whispering your name when no one else could see your worth. They'll call it overthinking. You'll call it awareness. They'll say you're too sensitive. You'll call it discernment. And somewhere between their ridicule and your silence, you'll realize you see too much to live like them. You feel too deeply to play their games. You notice what they ignore, hear what they pretend not to, and once you've seen behind the curtain, you can't pretend the show still dazzles you. You don't belong in the play. You belong in the truth. That's the problem. Because most people, they're addicted to the performance. They crave the illusion, the smiles, the small talk, the roles. They dress in expectations like armor. They repeat rehearsed lines about happiness, success, and love while dying inside. And when you show up, real, raw, unrehearsed, you threaten the whole production. And when you show up, real, raw, unrehearsed, you threaten the whole production. And when you show up, not because you attack them, no, just because you exist, just because you don't need a mask to breathe. The danger isn't that you're different. It's that your difference reminds them they could be too. See, society has rules, not the kind you see written in laws, the deeper ones, the ones coded into conversations, into silence, into how you're supposed to shrink when you're around people who are uncomfortable with your fire. You learn real quick. Don't talk too loud about your dreams. Don't mention your fears unless they're popular. Don't speak your truth unless it flatters someone. Water it down. Dress it up. Make it soft enough so no one has to grow to understand it. But you didn't come here for that. You weren't built for surface. You weren't shaped by comfort. You were forged in contradiction, in quiet rooms and loud thoughts, in chaotic years that looked like failure but were actually training grounds. In a time like this, mayhap, you were forged in contradiction, in quiet rooms, in conflict with others. You were built in places that didn't clap for you. That's why you don't need applause to keep going. That's why you move like a threat even when you're silent. And the more awake you become, the more allergic you get to things that used to satisfy you. Fake friends, lazy conversations, shallow goals. It all starts to itch. It's like being stuck in clothes that don't fit anymore. You can pretend for a while, smile for the camera, blend into the crowd. You can stand in places. They don't fit anymore. You can pretend for a while, smile for the camera, blend into the crowd. You can pretend for a while, but eventually, your spirit starts suffocating. And when that happens, there's only two choices. Lie to yourself or leave the room. Most stay. You didn't. You broke the spell. You stopped drinking the poison and started asking questions. Why am I really here? What part of me am I betraying just to keep the peace? Who benefits from my silence? And suddenly, the world didn't look so beautiful. It looked built on. But there's no silence. And suddenly, the world didn't look so beautiful. It looked built, designed. A system crafted to keep you numb, busy, scared, and distracted. A machine that feeds on your confusion and sells it back to you as identity. But you saw it, and once you did, nothing could taste the same again. The kind that makes you dangerous to anything built on manipulation. And here's the kicker. Once you access that kind of power, you become unrecognizable to those who only knew the edited version of you. They'll say you've changed. You'll smile quietly, knowing you didn't. You returned. You stopped betraying your own knowing. You stopped performing in your own life. And that shift, that quiet rebellion, It makes noise in every room you enter, not because you're loud, because you're clear. And clarity? It terrifies people who've built their lives on confusion. When you don't need their validation, their hierarchy crumbles. When you don't compete, their games lose meaning. When you don't flinch, their power evaporates. Because your presence isn't looking for permission, it's rooted in purpose. You see, the real war isn't out there, it's inside. Between your calling and your conditioning, between who you were told to be and who you really are. And every day you wake up and choose the real you, you declare war on the version of yourself that was built just to survive. And survival is not the goal anymore. Wholeness